No.
Joy, thank you very much. Joy Cardine has more news from Wisconsin after our next look at world and national news from NPR in the half hour. We're at 8 after 6 now on this Wednesday, the 26th of January. Wondering in our first hour, once again, what you think of the idea of a mourning dove hunt in Wisconsin. Here's the proposal that the season would be from early September through late October and would allow a hunter to kill 12 to 15 doves per day. And here are our numbers if you'd like to register in on this one. 1-800-642-1234. 1-800-642-1234. If the call is from the Madison area, 263-1890. 263-1890. As we just heard from Chuck, the Natural Resources Board will be considering this proposal this morning. We welcome our guest who's with us through the hour, an opponent of this idea. Our guest, the former park superintendent, a wildlife ecologist, and a landscape architect. I'm happy to welcome Erik Brynildson. Mr. Brynildson, good morning.
Good morning, Tom, and congratulations on your raise.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess starting in April, I'll be able to put food on the table.
There you go. Not mourning doves, I hope.
Well, yeah, right. Well, we heard from Representative Johnsrud the other day that the mourning dove is hunted throughout much of the rest of the country. He said it's the most hunted bird there is, which I didn't realize.
That's maybe true in terms of numbers of states that hunt the species. It's not true in terms of hunter participation. It certainly doesn't come close to, say, deer hunting, for instance.
Yeah. Well, if other states hunt them, then why shouldn't we be hunting them in Wisconsin?
Well, Wisconsin's traditionally had a legacy of being a leader in conservation issues. So I don't think that we need to play follow the leader. I think that we can set a standard that the nation really should look to. So it gets back sort of with me to the old adage of two wrongs don't make a right. Now this is always a controversial issue that ignites a heated debate. It does come up with some regularity in the state. This is actually the third time that I've personally fought against this proposal to kill native doves for recreation. Mm-hmm. The last time was in 1989, and I teamed up with my late great friend Owen Grommy, and we were successful in defeating it then. And so rather than ask the question, why not shoot mourning doves, I think a better question is, why shoot them at all?
Well, Representative Johnsrud says because it's a good game bird, it's hard to kill, and because they taste really, really good.
Well, again, that's coming from a very selfish and myopic perspective. If the dove season were to be approved, I would say that far less than 1% of Wisconsin's population would actually take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. We have to look at the sheer numbers of the doves, which I think are open for question. If you go to the USGS Patuxent breeding bird survey that's being quoted in the Wisconsin State Journal and other places, that's an ephemeral population at best.
We hear 1.5 million in Wisconsin.
1.5 million is what the group Wisconsin Concerned Citizens for Cranes and Doves is quoting. The DNR is using numbers more like 4 or 5 million.
Oh, really?
Yes, they are. Now, the 4 or 5 million may be somewhere between 1.5 million on the WCCCD numbers and the 4 or 5 million on the DNR side. Perhaps the peak migration in the fall, there may be over, say, a 30-day period, somewhere in between those two numbers, that many doves coming through the state heading south.
But now, if the numbers are in question, if we had a hunt and the dove numbers started to decrease, that would be easily adjustable. You would just reduce the number of birds that would be allowed to be killed, or you would not have a hunt for. I mean, that's something that you could handle.
Once a hunt, and I'm going to use the crow as an example in Wisconsin, is in place, mm-hmm. It's been historically, and I've done a lot of studies through Schorger and other people over the years. It's very difficult to dismantle or to take away once the hunt is in place, and so I think that we need to err on the side of caution or on the side of life, and There really is no solid, what I call soil-clad studies to determine just how many doves we have in terms of resident breeding here in the state. There's computer models that are being used, but beyond just sheer biological numbers, which I don't think is an adequate or a sound reason to kill things anyway. Certainly we have almost 6 billion people or so on the planet, so if we took that perspective, where do we end with it? But there are philosophical and moral and ethical dimensions when you start killing a species that is beneficial, in this case to farmers, and there's a direct aesthetic correlation to the extinct passenger pigeon, and so to people with an artistic bent and that just appreciate beauty for its own sake, those things I think have to be considered.
You see a mourning dove as different than a duck or a grouse or some other bird?
Well, without getting off our specific subject this morning and getting too philosophical and probably losing some callers in interest, I better not. I did hunt for 15 years myself, and I also worked in conservation law enforcement, so I saw, plenty of the negative side of hunting. And but I grew up in a family that has given a century's worth of service to the state in conservation. My father and one uncle actually were studying at the university at the time of Aldo Leopold, and knew him well. And so I learned to hunt from people like that.
Yeah. And
I've seen in my own observations and experiences, I've seen a drastic decline in just the quality of hunting overall, in my lifetime.
Yeah. What I'm trying to get at is that there are those who hunt. I wonder whether there are those who hunt and enjoy hunting, even hunting other birds, who would have some concern about hunting mourning doves.
Well, Tom, I think there definitely is, and I know a lot of those people, and they think, as I do, that there's a mentality out there right now that seems to be growing in strength, at least in our state, that I call, if it flies, it dies, and that sort of mentality is not doing anything to help responsible hunters. Whenever the target aspect comes into play, such as it is with the mourning dove, I don't. There's a clear difference between people that like to shoot and kill versus people that really, experience a quality hunt and all the things that go with that.
Our guest this hour is Erik Brynildson. He's a former park superintendent, a wildlife ecologist, and landscape architect, and as you're hearing, an opponent of this idea of a mourning dove hunting season here in Wisconsin. Here are our numbers. You'll find a busy signal if you try us now, but keep on trying, and I'll bet you'll get through before the hour's over. 1-800-642-1234. Or from Madison, 263-1890.
Are more state tax cuts on the way? Find out during Governor Tommy Thompson's State of the State address. You can hear it and reaction from lawmakers right here on Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm State Government Reporter John Powell, and I'll anchor our coverage tonight starting at 7 on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
Contributors to Wisconsin Public Radio include Paisan's Italian Restaurant in University Square, featuring homemade pasta, thin crust pizza, salads and sandwiches. A Madison tradition since 1950. Pleased to support programming on Wisconsin Public Radio.
Checking our weather forecast for today. Not too bad. A little bit on the cold side. Sunny with a high in the upper teens, perhaps 20 degrees. Clear tonight, a low of 0. Sunny tomorrow with a high temperature getting into the lower 20s. On Friday and Saturday, partly to mostly cloudy with highs in the 20s, and a chance of snow on Sunday. A little bit milder on Sunday with a high near 30. Currently in Madison, it's 2 degrees. In Milwaukee, 9. In Platteville and in La Crosse, it's 1. In Green Bay, 9. In Superior, it's 6 below.
President Clinton called the other day for an expenditure of $27 million to boost equal pay for women laws. Kathleen Dunn talks about that coming up after 5 this afternoon with Ellen Bravo. We're at 17 and a half after 6 o'clock, a Wednesday, the 26th of January, the year 2000. Things should be hopping this morning in room 27 of the State Natural Resources Building at 101 South Webster Street in Madison. They'll be considering in that meeting a mourning dove hunt in Wisconsin, which is under some controversy, as you know. Our guest with us this hour, an opponent of a mourning dove hunt, is Erik Brynildson, a wildlife ecologist. And let's get to the phone since they've been busy since about the time we said good morning, Mr. Brynildson. Let me welcome Noel in West Bend. Noel, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I have several questions why we should have a mourning dove season, and many of these center around research questions because it has not been a game bird in Wisconsin, has not been studied by the DNR, and we have little information on the population of doves in Wisconsin, which is really at the northern breeding part of its range, and therefore we don't know much about it. Surveys over the last 10 years, both the breeding bird survey conducted by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the call count surveys, show a significant decline in the populations of mourning doves in Wisconsin over the last decade. I have questions about the use of lead shot in the environment because a number of spent shells are used for each mourning dove taken. And I also concerned about misidentification of mourning doves with other species that are protected. So those are just a few of the reasons, and I guess I'd like to maybe hear a reaction from that.
Mr. Brynildson.
Well, those were all good points. The lead issue is an important one. I'm of course all for getting rid of lead shot completely. Mr. Johnsrud last Friday mentioned that is the preferred shotgun fill or BB type used for doves, and we don't need any increased lead on our landscape here in the state. They are upland birds, which the other side will argue, but Jim Zimmerman, one of my professors at Madison years ago, the late great one, used to talk about the upland-lowland connection, and basically what goes up must come down. So that lead inevitably ends up in streams and creeks and rivers and lakes and wetlands. So the lead issue is again a very important one. Another one that runs parallel to the lead is just the sheer noise that's reducing the tranquility in the Wisconsin countryside rapidly. Not just shooting, which is becoming a year-round thing, but chainsaws and ATVs and snowmobiles and gas-powered ice augers, and it goes on forever. Mm-hmm. So I would much rather hear the native sounds of doves rather than shotgun blasts.
Yeah. You said there are a lot of hunters that don't like this idea, but the Conservation Congress, the last time it voted, what was it, about 2-1 in favor of this mourning dove hunt?
It was approximately 2-1 is my understanding. Mm-hmm. The group, the Wisconsin Concerned Citizens for Cranes and Doves, has told me that they've now got something like 12,000 signatures. They've been circulating petitions since last April's hearings, and I believe they're going to be presenting those at the April 10th spring hearings this year. But traditionally the spring hearings have been attended by pretty much 95% plus of the people in attendance are there because they do hunt and trap and fish. So it's a very skewed, if we want to call it a survey or a sampling of the population and the sentiments of the general Wisconsin population. I don't think it's an accurate one. So I would definitely encourage people now that would like to see the dove protected, and there's, of course, we know about the sandhill crane proposal by the same representative, Mr. Johnsrud. If you have any kind of feelings about those birds and you don't want to see them killed for sport or recreation, I definitely encourage people to take part in the process.
Let me thank Noel for the call and welcome next Patricia in Madison. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Tom and Erik. This is Patricia Randolph, who is the only protectionist on the Conservation Congress out of 360 members, and the reason that I'm the only one is, and I do not speak for the Congress, I speak for the delegates of Dane County who elected me. The reason that I'm the only one, and the first one, is that the Wisconsin public is just waking up to being aware that they can participate in the process at the spring hearings the second Monday in April every year. It's supposed to be a public vote. It is advertised only in the outdoors page. So I'm just calling to urge the public that has not traditionally been involved in wildlife issues this issue will end up on this spring hearings April 10th at 7 o'clock in every county in the state.
So we're saying approval this morning by the Natural Resources Board is a gimme? This is a...
Well, I would assume that they are pro. I mean, the DNR Board, and the Conservation Congress are completely hunter-dominated. So since they want new killing opportunities in the state, and that is one of their strong focuses, along with getting non-hunter money to fund it. Those two obsessions in the DNR right now govern every activity. So, yeah, I think that I would like to give a number of the Wildlife Coalition that we are forming to get the vote out at the spring hearings on a regular basis. And that number is 608-242-1460. And I urge people to, if you care about wildlife and mourning doves and sandhill cranes, to attend the spring hearings. It's one night out of the year that we have a unique opportunity in this state for non-hunting citizens to be involved in the process.
Thanks, Patricia. Want to react, Mr. Brynildson?
Well, she said it well. I will remind listeners, not everybody heard Mr. Johnsrud his last time around last Friday, but he actually did make the statement that I think it's Trygve Solberg is now the chair of the DNR board, and he's calling this a no-brainer, and he sees absolutely no reason why the DNR board shouldn't approve it. I don't like the no-brainer attached to something as beautiful as the doves. Clearly, in my mind, that no brains were used in coming up with this moronic proposal is my answer to that. And she also mentioned the DNR and their attempts at finding alternative funding sources, which are desperately trying to do. But rather than see the native birds freely migrating south, the DNR sees money actually leaving the till. And I think that we have a huge philosophical chasm here between purely utilitarian views versus, actual appreciation of wild nature.
To Dwayne and Hayward next. Dwayne, hi.
There's nobody in this whole country that appreciates wildlife more than hunters do. The idea that the non-hunters appreciate wildlife more is a bunch of bunk. We should have a mourning dove hunt. There's no biological reason not to have one. 70 to 80% of the doves die of natural causes anyway, so they're very prolific whether you hunt them or not. You look at the statistics from other states, dove hunting has no effect on the population.
Mr. Brynildson.
Well, that's not true, and I've got lots of experience with population dynamics and understand how they work well. And the 80% mortality, I don't know where he's coming up with those figures. That's absolutely not true whatsoever. There has been an increased loss of doves due to free-ranging cats. Stan Temple at the university and some of his studies have shown that, and of course Mr. Johnsrud last April admitted that he allows his cats on the farm to run free, and they come in with the decapitated carcasses of doves quite often. But as far as hunters loving nature more than anyone else, I can only tell you that I, again, grew up in a family that has given over a century's worth of public service to the state and conservation. My father and one uncle were studied with Leopold. I have all my life, nature has been all that I know. I'm now restoring the boyhood home of John Muir, and that's what I do. I restore native plant communities specifically to benefit wildlife. So, don't think that because you think you're paying the way, that some of the rest of us that spend a lot of money on bird feeders and feed and crack corn and everything else that aren't doing that too.
Thanks for the call, Dwayne. Joanne in Portage next. Hello, Joanne.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning.
I want to thank you, first of all, for this program allowing listeners the opportunity to know what is happening with the mourning dove issue.
You're welcome.
As an advocate in the Portage area for the doves and also sandhill cranes, for the past 5 months, a petition opposing the proposal of a hunting season on doves has been circulated. And at this time, 1,000 citizens signed the petition opposing a hunting season. So Tom and Eric, I feel, in my view, this is a strong message that people in this area do not want a hunting season for the birds, for the dove, for recreational purposes or to increase license revenues. Then, in fact, the dove continued to be protected and not have the definition of a game bird. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to share what's going on in this area with you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Brynildson?
Well, thank you. Well, I agree. It's I think the majority of the state's citizens, unfortunately, like nearly in all issues, the majority remain complacent and indifferent to issues. But on this one, I think that those people that do care either way, clearly the majority do not want to see this bird hunted. I think it's another attempt by, I actually call the so-called sportsmen the minority or the selfish interest group, because their numbers are far less than the rest of us that don't want to see it hunted. So in this case, it is another attempt by them for the tail to wag the dog. And as I mentioned earlier, that if the season were to open tomorrow, far less than 1% of the state's population would actually go out and kill doves.
If this is approved, would this end up, do you think, Mr. Brynildson, back in the legislature?
Well, the next step beyond today's DNR board meeting, where I assume it will be rubber stamped,
is the Conservation
will
Congress.
Be the Conservation Congress.
Let's say they approve it then.
And I hope they don't, but if that is the case, I would think that it would be hard to stop at that point. I think it would go back to the DNR for their final approval.
But you don't see somebody making a law that there can't be.
Well, lawsuits are happen, but I think that the place to beat this is at the April 10th spring hearings, and I think it's like never before. People have got to get out there this year and put an end to this reign of terror on conservation in general that we've been experiencing over the last decade or so.
We're at news time, Mr. Brynildson. After the news, we'll have a chance to talk some more and welcome a lot more callers. 1-800-642-1234. A line is open now at 800-642-1234. The Madison number is 263-1890.
Contributors to Wisconsin Public Radio include Society Insurance, serving Wisconsin for over 80 years with property and casualty coverage for a variety of businesses, including specialty coverage for restaurant and tavern owners. Proud to support Wisconsin Public Radio.
It's 6:30. This is the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm Joy Cardine. Wisconsin Public Radio welcomes a performance by the Capitol Steps this Saturday night, January 29th at 8 p.m. at the Madison Civic Center. This evening of musical political satire features a bipartisan troupe of current and former congressional staffers who lampoon their employers and just about everyone else. For more information, call the Madison Civic Center box office, 266-9055. It's going to be a sunny day today, a high of about 20 degrees. Right now in Madison, it's 2.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Jean Cochran. The road clearing's been going on around the clock. That big storm yesterday left an awful lot of snow.
Raleigh-Durham has about 20 inches on the ground. Most of eastern Virginia has anywhere from 8 to 16 inches of snow on the ground. You get up into Maryland and Pennsylvania, you got about 10 to 14 inches of snow on the ground.
Michael Eckert is senior forecaster with the National Weather Service here in Washington. In Maryland, state highway officials say it could be days before the dig-out is complete. Shelters were open last night in Charlotte, North Carolina, where 40,000 people don't have power or heat. Carolyn Titus is Durham County Deputy Manager. She says they're worried about stranded motorists.
We are sending out National Guard personnel to go car to car, vehicle to vehicle, and ask the individuals if they would like to be transported to our local shelter. There are quite a few tractor trailers, fewer single car vehicles.
Several deaths are being blamed on the storm. The federal government here in Washington is closed, giving some 250,000 government workers another day off. The grandmothers of Elian Gonzalez hope to see their 6-year-old grandson today for the first time since the tug-of-war over the child began last November. If the weather allows them to fly out of Washington, the women will head to Florida for a government-ordered reunion. NPR's Erik Brynildson reports.
On Monday, the family sides couldn't agree on a neutral site for the boy's visit with his grandmothers, but the Immigration Service told lawyers for Elian's Miami relatives, with whom he's been living, that today's get-together is mandatory unless they wanted to jeopardize Elian's immigration status. The grandmothers will meet alone with their grandson, who's at the center of a politicized international custody dispute. The Miami relatives said they will comply with the INS order, but they charged that the meeting's host, Sister Jean O'Loughlin, is too sympathetic to Cuban leader Fidel Castro. They claim that Elian is scared to meet with the grandmothers because he fears he'll be sent back to Cuba. The meeting will take place at the gated Miami Beach home of Sister O'Loughlin, president of Barry University. The Immigration Service said the meeting was just a visit and would not change Elian's immigration status. Eric Westervelt, NPR News, Miami.
Coca-Cola reportedly is considering a major restructuring that could lead to massive layoffs. The Wall Street Journal says it would be the largest employee downsizing move in the company's history. Details will be revealed today when Coke issues its earnings report for the fourth quarter. Ford beat Wall Street expectations by 2 cents a share with its earnings report this morning. Ford says strong U.S. sales and continued cost-cutting pushed earnings up. For all of last year, Ford earned more than $7 billion, up 22% from 1998. President Clinton wants casinos to help squeeze child support payments out of deadbeat parents. He'll announce that as part of his new budget proposal. This is NPR News.
Support for National Public Radio comes from Lawyers.com for researching and understanding the law or identifying a lawyer. Online at Lawyers.com.
Tom Clark on the ideas. That a Wednesday, the 26th of January, the year 2000. This morning, the Natural Resources Board will be considering a mourning dove hunt in Wisconsin. And that's what we're considering in our first hour here on this Wednesday morning. With our guest, an opponent of a dove hunt, former park superintendent, wildlife ecologist, and landscape architect Erik Brynildson with us through the rest of the hour. Here are the numbers. Lines are full, but keep on trying. 800-642-1234 or in Madison, 263-1890. A look from Joy Cardine at State of Wisconsin News, then we're back with our guest. Now we're at 22 and a half minutes before that hour on this Wednesday, the 26th of January. Tom Clark with Erik Brynildson, our guest this hour, a wildlife ecologist, landscape architect, and former park superintendent, here to say we should not have a mourning dove hunt here in Wisconsin. And Mr. Brynildson, let's welcome our next caller, who's been holding Terry in Milwaukee. Morning, Terry. Terry? Okay, then Betty Anasio. Betty, good morning to you.
Good morning, and thank you for this guest. I do agree with what he is saying. And I just want to bring out the point that there are many of us who maybe have one pair of these beautiful and peaceful birds that visit our feeders. And, you know, if people around could shoot them, we're going to be deprived. And so I think there are many of us who love this bird and find it very sad to think that we wouldn't have them anymore. So I'd just like his comment on that.
Mr. Brynildson.
Well, again, I would encourage you to attend the April 10th spring hearings and vote against this proposal. I'm also not saying that a limited hunt, I'm not in any way encouraging any kind of hunt on this bird, but I'm just to stay with the scientific facts here, a limited hunt may not completely obliterate this bird from the state, in other words, but I'm still waiting for somebody to give me one solid reason that passes what I call ecological, philosophical, ethical, moral, and aesthetic muster for slaughtering this native species in this state.
Well, but I mean, that you make that same argument would hold for any hunt of any kind, wouldn't it? I mean, what you're saying is we shouldn't hunt.
I'm not saying that, Tom. I don't want to go that broad this morning. I'm not a hunter.
But if the hunting is okay, then how is hunting mourning dove different than hunting something else? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, their numbers, for one thing, are in question. There is no solid statewide data. It's a small target. It's basically a target. The proponents of this describe the bird as an erratic flyer, and
but the hunters say that's what's good about this hunt is that it's not that easy to hit, and that makes it more of a sport.
Well, again, the numbers have been shown they're declining over the northeastern fringes of the bird's range, and There's just no good reason at all to hunt the bird. I mean, it's just for the, as I mentioned earlier, just the aesthetic correlation to the extinct passenger pigeon should be reason enough to leave this bird alone. I think that we need to recall what happened to that species. It was market gunning primarily, but at the same time, I don't think people have quite learned that lesson. And the mourning dove is just a peaceful creature. It's already in place as our state bird of peace, and it's classified as a songbird. And let's leave that one fly freely.
And Joyce is with us in Madison. Hi, Joyce.
Good morning. Will you refresh my memory? I have not actively birded for a number of years, but my recollection is that mourning doves were kind of a village sidewalk yard bird, and I wonder how they can be safely hunted. Am I remembering incorrectly?
Yes, you are. You're thinking of the feral pigeon or the rock dove, which is a European species, and that's the same as a barnyard pigeon. Or you see them, they're actually nesting on State Street, in some of the buildings.
But that's not what we're talking about here today, right?
No, that's not what we're talking about. This is a native dove. This is our only native dove, so different bird.
Joyce, thanks. Laura in New Berlin. Hi, Laura.
Good morning, and thank you for the show. I just wanted to comment that on ethical grounds, I would be opposed to all hunting and relate the findings of a psychologist who continually searched for a morally relevant trait separating all humans from all animals. His name was Paul Chance, and he concluded that the only thing different from humans is that we are the only creature on Earth that tries to prove that it is different from and preferably superior to other species. Characteristics such as intelligence, awareness, and altruism exist to different degrees in all humans and animals, with some animals being more intelligent, aware, and altruistic than some humans.
Erik Brynildson.
Well, if people have been following the public television series that's been airing on Channel 21 Madison here for the past 3 or 4 weeks. It's a series on animal intelligence and communication and consciousness. And I totally agree with the caller. And as far as killing for recreation or sport, ideally, yes, this is my belief too, is that it's archaic and wrong, especially when we are living in a world where even sheer open space is rapidly disappearing. Certainly there's, the amount of roads, the pavement that we have, we're being spalled and mauled to death, and there's just very few wild spaces left that are adequate enough biologically for, native creatures. So, to shoot sentient creatures for sport and to use that term harvest like you would with grain or a pumpkin patch is absolutely, I think, into my way of thinking, barbaric.
And Chuck next in Monroe. Morning, Chuck.
Well, good morning. Yeah, tough call to follow. I don't know if I reach quite that high a philosophy. I'm an upland game hunter using a pointing dog, and I can tell you the thrill is tremendous. I try to, at least with the reflection of the previous call, each of my hunting episodes is to put and take. Whether it comes from fishing or pheasant hunting or duck hunting. Having said that, I sure don't see a reason for having to hunt mourning doves when the slant from the previous caller as well as your guest speaker notes that aren't we charged with becoming more humane and still not depriving everybody of what were previous freedoms. So I would say work on what you currently have and leave the mourning doves alone. And I'll listen to the answer off the air.
I appreciate the call, Mr. Brynildson.
Well, thank you. Having come from a hunting background myself, I especially appreciate his comments. I experienced a personal evolution in my way of thinking toward, killing things. But I do believe that as time goes on, we're in the new millennium now, that certain traditions and rituals really need to be focused on, and we need to reassess them. And those that are not serving our society in a really positive, progressive way, I think need to be abandoned. So I think that we are actually at a crossroads, and the dove becomes a symbol for something much larger. And I think that these issues will come head to head as I think in the first decade of this new century. And I think that you're going to see some traditions either very much modified or maybe abandoned altogether.
Chuck, thanks for the call. We'll check the weather. Then we're back with Erik Brynildson, a wildlife ecologist, landscape architect, former park superintendent, talking about the proposed mourning dove hunt in Wisconsin. A line is now open at 1-800-642-1234. 1-800-642-1234. If you're a Madison caller, 263-1890.
For new ideas and fresh perspectives, keep it right here on the Ideas Network. We look for the very best guests to talk about issues you care about, and we welcome calls from listeners like you. From where we've been to where we're headed, you'll hear all about it on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
Checking our weather forecast for today, expect plenty of sunshine. It's going to remain on the cold side, though, a high temperature somewhere in the upper teens, maybe 20 degrees. Clear tonight, a low of 0. Sunny tomorrow with a high temperature getting into the lower 20s. On Friday and Saturday, it'll be partly to mostly cloudy, highs in the 20s. And then on Sunday, a chance of snow, a little bit milder, with a high temperature of about 30. Currently, it's clear across much of the area to partly cloudy. Madison, 2 degrees. In Platteville and in La Crosse, it's 1. Milwaukee, 9. In Superior, it's 6 below. Eau Claire, 8 below 0. Wausau, 10 above. In Green Bay, it's 9 degrees. In Oshkosh, it's 6. Again, sunny today. Expect a high near 20.
Thirteen minutes before 7 o'clock, now on this Wednesday, the 26th of January, the year 2000, after 7 this morning. Does it make sense that YMCAs operate tax-free as a nonprofit organization and run the same sorts of health club stuff as private health clubs do? Well, put yourself in the position of the private business owner trying to get customers and having to compete with a nonprofit. That's what we'll be talking about in our next hour. We'll welcome an owner of 5 fitness centers in the greater Milwaukee area who thinks that the Y ought to pay taxes on their health clubs. That coming up. We're wondering this hour about a mourning dove hunt in Wisconsin with our guest who is opposed to same. He's wildlife ecologist Erik Brynildson, and Mr. Brynildson, our next caller is Jason in Oshkosh. Hello, Jason.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to make a couple points. First of all, the gentleman you have on alluded to the fact that we have a shrinking wildlife area and open space available in this country, and I'd like to make the point that hunting organizations and groups as such have done more to preserve natural spaces and natural land for the purpose of hunting and for keeping these types of areas available to people than any ecological groups have or anti-hunting groups have done for this country.
What about a mourning dove hunt?
I don't have anything against that. I don't think it's going to harm anybody. And what I'm afraid of, and what I don't think is being expressed, and I think his comments towards traditions being challenged in this next millennium lead to the fact that he's probably against all hunting, and that most people that are against this mourning dove hunt and the people that have been calling in, it's pretty obvious from their comments that they'd like to see all hunting eliminated, and I think that's wrong. I think it's an important part of our heritage, and I think for the people that enjoy it, they should be able to enjoy it, and the people who don't care for it need to leave the hunters alone and mind their own business. And if they want to create an area where they don't want hunting, go out and buy some land and set that land aside and say there's no hunting there. But don't try and enforce their beliefs on everybody else. I think it's wrong, and I just it scares me to think that there's an organized force out there that is trying to eliminate the traditions that that I grew up with and that I'd like to share with my children as they grow up. It's been an important part of my life, and it's helped shape who I am. And I'm not, I'm not a worse person for having hunted or killed creatures or harvested, as your caller pointed out, was such a terrible term. I think it's a wonderful activity that builds character and should be protected and preserved. And if people want a mourning dove hunt, they should be able to. I have no interest in it, but I'm not going to be harmed by it. And his point that the passenger pigeon was wiped out, I think that's irrelevant. Most of the species that people hunt now have actually proliferated, under the stewardship of managed hunting. The whitetail herd has increased. The goose population has increased. There was a hunter, my wife's grandfather, who discovered that lead shot was harming the geese, and he helped to rebuild that population. And I just think I think hunters do more for wildlife in this country that they're given credit for.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Brynildson.
Well, there's an awful lot there. As far as proliferating wildlife numbers, he's right this far that we have many more, for instance, deer, and is a good example than we ever have had, historically. So what we're seeing is we have a lot more of fewer species. In terms of biological diversity or ecological diversity, most things are on the wane worldwide. And as far as buying land and restoring it, I've done that several times, and I'm currently doing that here at the Fountain Lake Farm National Historic Landmark, the boyhood home of John Muir. As far as the sportsmen, again, purchasing most of the lands in this country that have been set aside for nature, that's not even close to true when you consider the wilderness reservations and forests and national parks and state parks and so on. Most of that has come out of the general tax fund, either federally or state, and even the federal wildlife refuges now have basically become public hunting grounds. So I think the sportsmen, hunters, trappers, fishers, whatever, are certainly given plenty of credit for the dollars that come from Pittman Robertson and other sources. I think it's time, though, that people that don't care to destroy wildlife and reduce it to private possession, we need to get creative, and we need to maybe have a Pittman Robertson-like tax on bird feeders and even bird seed and food, and maybe cameras and binoculars and canoes or whatever. But that argument coming from the hunter, again, that really is privately benefiting or reaping dividends out of capital stock belonging to us all, is one that needs to be addressed. And so some of his points, I understand, but again, I think that change is always painful. And it's something that it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, literally, and we need to still take a look at it, because our society is changing rapidly, and it has changed. And some of these traditions, again, and rituals that we're used to doing, or just need to be investigated and looked at again.
And Tina with us in Madison next. Tina, hi.
Hi. Great show. I would like to say, on actually response to that caller, I was going to talk about the fact that we are a very large majority of people in the state that do not want this, and yet we don't have a voice. And I think the most important thing is to let people know that, the non-hunters who believe in protection of wildlife is over 85% of the population of this state. The hunters are a very powerful minority, but they like to think that their decisions are law, and that they should be able to do what they want. We'd be happy to support conservation efforts, like you said, even if it meant putting a tax on things that mean, canoeing or whatever it is that you enjoy doing. If you don't enjoy going out in the woods with a shotgun, but you do love going out in the woods, to pay. But the problem is, if we pay the DNR, we know that those dollars are going to go for killing. And so I think that that's why our opinions are always rejected, because we haven't been able to put our money into this organization. I really want to stress that I'm glad you're talking about the spring hearings, because so many people have come to me. I work with the Alliance for Animals, have said that they are very intimidated to go to the spring hearings in April, and they shouldn't be. The majority of the people, like you said, 90% of these people are only hunters, because they're the only ones who know about it. We're going to change all that. We really want people to go to the spring hearings and not be afraid to vote for protection, and especially for the doves, for the cranes, for the bobcats, whatever. These wild animals are under attack, and I just appreciate the show. Again, I work with the Wildlife Coalition that we're forming, and the number in Madison is 242-1460, and we're ready to help people, get out there April 10th.
Erik Brynildson.
Well, thank you for the comments.
And to Wayne in Vernon next. Hello, Wayne.
Good morning, Eric. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
The gentleman from Oshkosh made the point that hunters and their ilk provide so much money for habitat, and I think that he overlooks the fact that nationally the Nature Conservancy puts thousands of acres into protection, as well as right here in Waukesha, the Waukesha County Nature Conservancy, and Ellen Ginrich and her group are very, very active in protecting land for wildlife and for people. I am a hunter. I'm an upland hunter, and I do oppose this hunt. I think it's a lousy idea. I've heard Dwayne Johnsrud, and I did not think that he made a very compelling argument. So here's one vote opposed to the hunt. But I would also like a question for your guest, Eric.
Do it quick, please.
I feed a lot of mourning doves in my feeder. Now, are these the type of birds, and they're not migratory, they stay all winter. Are these the same types of birds that they want to hunt?
Yes, they are, and like robins, you'll even find robins in your yard year-round. Every once in a while, if you look at the bird counts that Audubon and others do, species that you don't really think of seeing in the wintertime do appear, and maybe in small numbers. But yes, the mourning dove that you're talking about that you see in a single bird or pairs at your feeder now this time of year is the same native species.
We have just a half a minute. Representative Johnsrud said if we don't have a hunt in Wisconsin, these birds just go down to Illinois and they get killed in Illinois.
That's the old, instead of watching these beautiful birds fly freely or migrate freely south, as they have for millions of years, that's money leaving the till, when you think like Dwayne Johnsrud and the DNR.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there, I guess. Erik Brynildson, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Erik Brynildson, a wildlife ecologist and landscape architect, is a former park superintendent. Cassette copies of our talk programming can be purchased at the radio store. Here's that number, 1-800-747-7444. And this has been program number 126A.